Hello everyone, here is Afra Syab. Today we are going to solve Cambridge IGCSE Physics Paper 4 Theory Extended held on October-November 2021 and paper code is 0625 with variant 42. So let's start from question number 1. Question number 1. Figure 1.1 shows a space rocket accelerating away from a launch pad. So here is the rocket that is accelerating in figure 1.1. Figure 1.2 is the speed time graph for the first 30 seconds of the rocket's flight. Part A. Describe how the acceleration of the rocket changes between time t is equal to 10 seconds and time t is equal to 30 seconds. So here 10 seconds is this and 30 seconds is this. So in this graph, the time is taken on the x-axis while the speed is taken on the y-axis, and there are different values of speed and time. And the graph is plotted between speed and time, and we know that the gradient of speed time graph gives us acceleration. So I write here gradient of speed time graph is equal to acceleration. And gradient is actually the slope of this graph. When we find out the slope of this graph, slope will be equal to delta y, the quantity that is taken on the y-axis, over delta x that is taken on the x-axis. And here delta y is actually change in speed. So I write here delta v divided by, on x-axis we have taken time, so I write here delta t. The slope of this graph is equal to delta v over delta t, and it is equal to acceleration. So we can simply say that the gradient of velocity time graph that is also equal to slope is equal to the acceleration. In the part 1, we have to describe that the how acceleration of the rocket changes between time t is equal to 10 to 30 seconds. So first of all, I mark a point at time t is equal to 10 and time t is equal to 30 seconds. Here we can see that the speed time graph is a curve. Then we draw the tangent at different points on this curve, and we get as, if I consider this point and draw the tangent, it will be just like this. When I draw at this point, so these tangent draw at different point, and these are increasing, means that the slope is increasing, and this curve is becoming more steeper with the passage of time. So we can simply say that the acceleration of rocket is increasing. So I write here acceleration increases between time t is equal to 10 to 30 seconds. So I write here acceleration increases. Part B. By drawing a tangent to the graph, determine the acceleration of the rocket at time t is equal to 25 seconds. At time t is equal to 25 seconds, we have to find out the acceleration by drawing the tangent. So first of all, I remove these tangents and consider time that is 20 seconds. We have to draw a tangent at 25 seconds. So I write here 25, and this point will be this. I have to draw the tangent at this point first and then find out the value of acceleration. So I draw the tangent here. And this curve will be just like this. I have drawn it here. Now to find out the acceleration, I have to find out the slope of speed time graph, and when I find out the speed time graph slope, it will be equal to delta v over delta t that I already written here. So first of all, I have take 2 points. One is at this, that is final point, and initial point is this. Then I have to find out the corresponding values on the time axis and speed axis. So this time is basically at 20.5. So I write here 20.5, and this time is at 30 seconds. So 30 seconds. We have find out the time on the x-axis. We also have to find out their corresponding speed values. So I just use the ruler and draw the lines. I also use ruler and draw line at this point. So this line basically cuts the speed axis at this point. We can see from here that the speed at the initial point is 1000, and when I count the speed on final point, it comes to be 1750. So I write here 1750 meter per second. Now you have to find out the slope. It will be equal to delta v is 1750 minus 1000 divided by change in time is 30 minus 20.5. 30 minus 20.5, and the acceleration comes to be 79 meter per second square. So the acceleration comes to be 79 meter per second square between time t is equal to 20.5 and 30 seconds. And their corresponding speed values are 1000 and 1750 meter per second. So I write here acceleration is equal to 79 meter per second square. Part C. Determine the distance traveled by the rocket between t is equal to 0 and t is equal to 10 seconds. So we have to find out the distance between 0 to 10 seconds. So going back to the graph. First of all, 10 seconds is at this point. So I use the ruler and see the point where it touches the y-axis. So I draw a line here at this point, and I also join it with x-axis. So the curve of speed time graph at 0 to 10 seconds is a straight line, and when we have to find out the distance traveled by the rocket, it will be equal to the area under this curve. So this area basically shows the distance covered by the rocket. I have to find out this, and we know that the distance covered by the rocket will be equal to the area under this curve, and it's a triangle, so the area of triangle will be equal to 1/2 base multiplied by height. Here base is time and height is speed. So I write here that distance traveled by body will be equal to area shaded under curve, and it's a triangle, so its area will be equal to 1/2 base multiplied by height. And by putting values 1/2, we have to put here time, and at the place of height we have to put the values of speed. So time is here 10 seconds. So I write here 1 over 2, 10 multiplied by, we have to find out the speed at 10 seconds, and it comes to be, at this point it is 400. So I write here 400 meter per second. And after simplification it comes to be 2000, and distance is measured in meters, so I write here meter, it is equal to distance. So I write here distance is equal to 2000 meters. Question number 2, part A, define Hooke's law. So here we have to define that what is meant by Hooke's law. So if I consider a spring, it will be just like this, and if I connect it with hard spot, and then it is the rest position of this spring, then I draw another, and I apply force on this spring, and this spring extended, it will be just like this. This spring get extension, so here I apply force in this direction, then the length of this spring changes. The initial length is this, while the final length changes. I draw a line here. It means that when you apply a force, then the spring extended. So this extension is basically represented by X, and Hooke's law defined as the force that I applied is directly proportional to the extension. So I write here the definition of Hooke's law. Extension of a spring is directly proportional to the load until the elastic limit. Elastic limit is basically the region in which this extension is directly proportional to load. After that, the relation between them may not be direct. They may vary inverse, or they may be a curved. So elastic limit is that in which the force is directly proportional to extension, and we write it as F is directly proportional to X. Here X is extension and F is force. And to remove this constant of proportionality, I write here F is equal to Kx, where K is spring constant and constant of proportionality. Part B. Figure 2.1 shows the extension load graph for a spring. Part 1. On figure 2.1, mark and label the region where the spring obeys Hooke's law. So we have to tell the region on the graph where the spring obeys Hooke's law, and I already tell that the force or the extension is directly proportional to the force. Means that the point at which this line remains straight, we have to label this region. So at this point, you can see that at this point it is a straight line. After that point it is a curved. It means that at t is equal to 0 to 20.5 seconds, the graph between extension and load is directly proportional to each other, means that it is a straight line, both varies directly with each other. If I increase the extension, the load also increases, and if I decrease the extension, load also decreases. So this is the region basically, and I will label it as so in this region, Hooke's law obeyed. I write here obey Hooke's law. I also highlight this region with highlighter. So this region is basically Hooke's law, which is a straight line. Part 2. Calculate the spring constant K. So here we have to calculate the spring constant. I take any point on the x-axis. It means that I take any point of load and calculate its corresponding extension, and then by using this formula I can calculate spring constant that is represented by K. So let's suppose that the point is you can see from here that 2 box is equal to 1 Newton. Because 2 small box is equal to 1 Newton, that's why 2 big box is equal to 10 Newton. So if I suppose that this is the point and I have to find out its corresponding extension values, I meet it with the graph and then find out its extension values. It meet at this point with the curve, and I also drop it on y-axis and draw a line here. So the corresponding extension value is 60, as this scale is calibrated in millimeters, so we have to consider it. Now using this formula, K is equal to F over X. So load is 8.5 here. I write here 8.5 divided by the extension is 60 millimeter. So I write here 60, and when I divide it, extension comes to be 0.14. So it comes to be 0.14. I write here 0.14 and its unit is Newton per millimeter. So this is also I have to write here that K is equal to 0.14 Newton per millimeter. Part 3. The original length of the spring is 120 millimeter. Calculate the length of the spring when a load of 8.5 Newton is applied to the spring. So we have to calculate the length of spring when load of 8.5 Newton is applied. So going back to the diagram and considering when load is 8.5, it is at this point. I already calculate the value of K here. So its corresponding extension is 60. So I write here extension of spring when load is equal to 8.5 Newton. So its corresponding extension is 60 millimeter. And we also given the original length of the spring, that is 120 millimeter. So we have to calculate the length of the spring, that is the total length of the spring. So I write here total length of spring will be equal to the original length, that is 120 millimeter, plus when I apply load of 8.5 Newton, it comes to be 60 millimeter. So the total length is equal to 180 millimeter. I write here 180 millimeter, which is the total length. Next part C. The weight of the object is 4.0 Newton on a planet where the acceleration of free fall is 8.7 meter per second square. Calculate the mass of the object. Here we have to calculate the mass of object when the weight and acceleration of free fall is given. So we know that weight is the product of mass and acceleration due to gravity. So here we have to calculate mass. Mass comes to be W, that is weight, over G. Weight is given 4.0 Newton and value of G is 8.7 meter per second square. So the weight comes to be 0.46 kilogram. So I write here mass is equal to 0.46 kilogram. Question number 3. Figure 3.1 shows a collision at very slow speed between two cars traveling along a straight road. So in a figure 3.1, two cars are shown and the collision between them is happening. So car B of mass 800 kg is moving at 2.0 meter per second and collide with car A of mass 1000 kg, which is stationary. Stationary means that it is at rest, it is not moving. After the collision, both cars travel in the same direction as the initial direction of car B. Part A. After the collision, the car A moves at 1.3 meter per second. Show that the speed of car B after the collision is approximately 0.4 meter per second. So first of all, I write here the data that is given in this question, that for car B, mass is given, if I consider it M1, mass is given 800 kg. I write here 800 kilogram. And its speed is 2.0 meter per second. I represent it with U1. It is equal to 2.0 meter per second. So it collides with car A of mass 1000 kg. For car A, mass M2 is equal to 1000 kilogram, and which is stationary, means that its initial velocity is equal to 0. So I write here U2 will be equal to 0. Part A. After the collision, the car A moves with 1.3 meter per second. It means that the final velocity of car A, it is equal to 1.3 meter per second. I write here V2 is equal to 1.3 meter per second. Show that the speed of car B after the collision is approximately 0.4 meter per second. We have to find out the velocity of car B after collision. So by using the law of conservation of momentum, that the total momentum of the system is conserved. Or we can say that the total momentum before collision is equal to total momentum after collision. I write here total momentum before collision is equal to total momentum after collision. So momentum is the product of mass and speed, and total momentum before collision, it means that we have to take the momentum of both cars. So I write here initial momentum, that is m1 u1 plus m2 u2. It is equal to m1 final momentum v1 plus m2 v2. So here we have to put the values. So I write here m1 is 800 multiplied by u1 is 2.0 plus m2 is 1000 kg multiplied by v2 is equal to 0. It will be equal to m1 again is 800 and we have to calculate its speed. So I write here v1 plus m2 is 1000 multiplied by speed is 1.3 meter per second. So here we have to find out the v1. This term cancels because of 0. It will be equal to 0. So it comes to be 1600 will be equal to 800 v1 plus 1300. So here we have to calculate v1. So it comes to be v1 is equal to 1600 minus 1300 divided by 800, and it will be equal to 300 over 800. So it comes to be 0.4 meter per second. It is approximately equal to this, and it is equal to 0.38 meter per second. Part B 1. Calculate the impulse exerted by the car A on car B. Here we have to calculate impulse, and we know that impulse is equal to the change in momentum. I write here impulse I is equal to change in momentum. And it is represented by delta P. So impulse comes to be, that is 1300 and its initial momentum is 0. So I write here 1300 minus 0, it is equal to 1300 Newton second. So I write here 1300 Newton second. Part 2. State the impulse exerted by car B on car A. We know that the impulse exerted by the car A on car B is equal to the impulse exerted by the car B on car A. So the impulse that is equal to 1300 is also be the impulse exerted by the car B on car A. So impulse of both of these are equal. I write here impulse is equal to 1300 Newton second. The unit of impulse is Newton second. And I write here hint that impulse of VA will be equal to impulse of AB. That is, the impulse exerted by the car B on A will be equal to the impulse of car B on car A. That's why the impulse of both of these are equal, and I write here 1300 Newton second. Question number 4, part A. A power station uses wind energy to generate electricity. State and explain whether this method of generating electricity is renewable. So renewable source is one that can be renewed again and again. It can be used again and again, and this source does not run out. So here wind energy is used as a source, and wind can be used again and again, and it cannot be run out. So I write here it's a renewable source. And in explanation, I write that wind does not run out. That's why it's a renewable source of energy. Part B. State two energy resources that do not have the sun as their source. So there are basically three energy sources that do not have the sun as their source. These are geothermal energy, nuclear energy, and tidal energy. So I write here, we have to write here only two. That's why I write here geothermal. Geothermal means that the energy that obtained from the earth, and tidal energy is that energy that is obtained from the tides. Part C. For each energy resource, state the form of energy stored in fossil fuels and water behind hydroelectric dams. So here we have to tell that which kind of energy is stored in fossil fuel. So in the fossil fuel, energy stored in the form of chemical energy. So it's a chemical energy. And water behind hydroelectric dam. So water is stored at a certain height, and this water falls down in the hydroelectric dam, and this falling energy is used to rotate the turbine, and then we generate the electricity. So I write here simple steps that water is stored at certain height, and then this water falls down, and this falling energy basically rotates the turbine, and then we get the electricity or electrical energy. So, as at a certain height, the energy stored in the form of potential energy. So, in the hydroelectric dam, energy is stored in the form of gravitational potential energy. Question number 5, Part A. A thermocouple thermometer is used to determine the temperature difference between mixture of ice and water and liquid mercury at approximately 600 degrees C temperature. Complete figure 5.1 with a labeled diagram to show how the thermocouple thermometer can be used in this way. So on figure 5.1 we have to complete this figure by drawing thermocouple thermometer. So first of all, we have to know about the thermocouple thermometer. It consists of two different wires. And galvanometer. So first of all, I draw the first wire. This will be drawn in such a way that one end of this wire will be on left side, on this side, while the second end will be on this side. So when I draw this, it will be So I draw the first wire here. The second wire will be in such a way that at the center of this wire we have attached the galvanometer, and similarly we draw the second wire in such a way that one side of this will be in the mixture of ice and water, while the second side of this wire will be in liquid mercury at approximately 600 degrees C. So when I draw the second wire, it will be so here we have to attach the galvanometer G, and this point are basically junction where both of these wires meet, and this wire is metal 2 wire, while this is metal 1 wire. So now this is a complete figure, and we also have labeled this. Part B. State 2 other physical properties that can be used to measure temperature. So we have to state the other physical properties that can also be used to measure the temperature. So first of all is expansion of liquid, that is for example we do this in liquid in glass thermometer. So I write here expansion of liquid. As in liquid in glass thermometer, and second one is electrical resistance. I write here electrical resistance, and this is measured in thermistor. Part C. State 2 benefits of using a thermocouple thermometer instead of liquid in glass thermometer. So we have to describe the benefits that why we use the thermocouple thermometer and we don't prefer to use liquid in glass thermometer. So first of all, the thermocouple thermometer has large range, and it means that it measures the temperature between very wide range. So I write here thermocouple thermometer, it has large range of temperature and second one is that it is also be used to measure very high temperature. So I write here measure very high temperature. That's why we prefer thermocouple thermometer over liquid in glass thermometer. Question number 6. Figure 6.1 shows particles of material in which a sound wave is traveling. So here is a figure 6.1 on which different particles are shown that are traveling. Part A. On figure 6.1 mark 1. The center of the compression with the letter C. So here we have to show that where the compression occurs on this wave. So first of all we have to know about the compression and rarefaction. Compression are the portion where the particles are very close to each other. Particles are closer and the pressure is very high at compression. While rarefaction are those portions where the particles are far away from each other and the pressure is very low. On this figure we can see that at the start the distance between the particles is very large, while at that region the particles are very close to each other. So this region basically represents the compression, while this region basically represents the rarefaction. So we have to represent it with C. So I label here the compression is the region from this one and it is represented with C. I write here C. Part 2. The center of the rarefaction with R. So first of all we have to analyze the region of rarefaction. So rarefaction is represented by this region where the particles are far away from each other, and we have to represent it with R. I write here R. Part 3. One wavelength with double-ended arrow. So first of all we have to know that what is wavelength. Wavelength is the distance between two consecutive compressions or rarefaction. So in the figure we can see that this is the first compression and this is second compression. So the distance between these is basically equal to wavelength. I will draw here a line. So compression starts from this point and end at this point. So the distance between two compression is basically equal to wavelength. This distance is equal to wavelength and we have to show this with double arrow. So I write here wavelength lambda. Part B. Circle one value from the list which is speed of sound in water. So here we have to tell that what is the range of speed of sound in water. We know that the speed of sound in air is 330 meter per second. I write here speed of sound in air is equal to 330 meter per second. Here in the question we have asked the speed of sound in water. In water the speed of sound is greater as compared to air. So we have to take the value that is greater than 300. So first option is 15 meter per second. It's not correct because it is less than 330. Second one is 150. This is also less than 330. So this is also incorrect. And third one is 1500 meter per second. This answer is correct because it is greater than 330 meter per second and the speed of sound in the water is not too much large. So 1500 meter per second is correct. Part C. The wavelength of sound wave in water is 12 centimeter. Calculate the frequency of this sound wave using your value from B. So wavelength is given, that is equal to 12 centimeter. I write here wavelength lambda is equal to 12 centimeter and we have to use the value from part B, that is the speed of sound in water. So I write here V is equal to 1500 meter per second. So we have to find out the frequency here. We know that V is equal to F lambda. Here we have to calculate F and it will be equal to V over lambda. The speed is 1500 divided by wavelength given in centimeter. We have to convert this into meter. So I write here 12 multiplied by 10 to the power minus 2 meters. And the frequency comes to be 13,000 Hertz. And this is also equal to 13 kilohertz. So I write here 13,000 Hertz. The unit of frequency is Hertz. Part D. State and explain whether the sound in Part C is ultrasound. So we have to tell that either this sound is ultrasound or not. So its frequency comes to be 13,000 Hertz. And we know that the frequency between 20 Hertz to 20,000 Hertz is audible range, that is heard by the human. I write here audible frequency range. So this frequency, that is 30,000 Hertz, is also lies between this range. So the sound is not ultrasound, it is audible frequency. It is audible sound. So I write here in statement, it is not ultrasound. So I write here no. And in explanation, I write that 13 kHz is very less as compared to 20 kHz. Therefore, it's not ultrasound. 13,000 Hertz is less than 20,000 Hertz. Therefore, it is not ultrasound. Question number 7. Figure 7.1 shows a ray of light approaching face AB of a glass prism of refractive index 1.5. Here is the prism in 7.1 and a ray of light is falling on the face AB. Part A 1. On figure 7.1, accurately draw the path of ray within the prism from face AB to face AC. So here we have to draw the path of the ray when this enters the prism from AB to AC. You will need to make a measurement from figure 7.1 and carry out a calculation. So first of all, to draw the path of this ray inside the prism, we have to draw the normal. First step is that draw normal. By using ruler, I draw the normal at face AB. So this is the normal line here. And secondly, we have to measure angle of incidence is basically the angle that the ray of light make with the normal line. So here we have to find out the angle of incidence and it will be equal to this. It is angle of incidence. So by using the protractor, we can find out this angle and this angle comes to be 60 degree. So I write here angle of incidence is equal to 60 degree. Then we have to draw the path of this ray when it enters inside the prism, and for that we have to know about the angle of refraction. And first of all, we know that according to Snell's law that refractive index n, it is equal to sine of angle of incidence over sine of angle of refraction. Here we have to find out the value of r. So I write it as sine of r will be equal to sine of I over n. The angle of incidence is 60 degree divided by refractive index is given in the question and it is 1.5. So I write here 1.5. Here we have to find the value of r. It will be equal to sine inverse of sine 60 degree divided by 1.5. And after calculation the angle of refraction comes to be 35 degrees. So on this diagram we have to measure that at which position angle is 35 from the normal, and if you consider that this angle is basically 35 degree, then this ray, that is the ray of light incident, will be refracted inside the prism at this angle. I draw this ray as it will be just like this. This is the refracted ray inside this prism. So I label it with refractive ray and it is angle 35 degree. So this is the path of this ray of light inside the prism. Part 2. Determine the angle of incidence of this ray when it strikes the face AC. So the ray that strikes on the face AC, we have to determine its angle of incidence. So this is the face AC and this ray is basically incident on the face. We have to find out the angle of incidence for this ray. So first of all I draw the normal again at this surface. So this is the normal line. That is perpendicular on this surface, and then we have to measure the angle of incidence. This angle of incidence is basically that is this incoming ray and this normal ray. This is basically the angle of incidence, and by using the protector we can measure it and it comes to be 10 degrees. So I write here angle of incidence for face AC will be equal to 10 degrees. So I write here angle is equal to 10 degrees. Part B. Without further measurement or calculation, sketch on figure 7.1 the approximate path of the ray after passing through the face AC. When this light ray leaves face AC, we have to draw its path. So going back to the diagram, we can see from here that the prism is a denser medium while outside medium is rare medium. Rare medium is actually that has less density, while the denser medium is that has very large amount of density. So when a ray of light coming from denser to rare medium, it bends away from the normal. I write here when ray of light coming from denser to rare medium it bends away from normal. So this ray, when it leaves the prism, it will bend away from this red line, that is the normal line. I will redraw it as This is the ray that is coming out of this prism. So this is the path of the ray of light when it leaves the face AC. Part C. Figure 7.2 shows a ray of light traveling within an optical fiber. So here is the figure 7.2 and this is the incident ray that strikes one point X and it's an optical fiber. Part 1. Complete the path of the ray of light to the left hand end of the fiber. So we have to draw the complete path of this ray inside this optical fiber. So we can see from this figure that a ray of light is incident at a point X and it will get totally reflected. None of this part will be refracted. So there will be totally internal reflection. I will draw the path of this ray. It will be just like this. So in this way it is refracted from the inside of this prism, inside of this optical fiber and does not refract it. Part B. Name the process taking place at X. So we have to describe the name of the process that is taking place at X. It is total internal reflection. So I write here total internal reflection. Because the ray is deflected again and again, it does not refract it. That's why it's a total internal reflection. Question number 8, part A. Figure 8.1 shows a conducting object A, initially uncharged, held on an insulating stand. The positively charged rod B is brought close to the object A. So in the figure 8.1 we can see that it's an insulating stand and a conducting object A is present here. And near this object we have brought a charged rod B. Part 1. On figure 8.1 draw the distribution of charges on object. So in this figure we can see that when the positively charged rod is brought near the object that is conducting, then what will happen? As you can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are total 5 number of charges on the rod B. Then equal amount of negative charges will appear on this side and equal number of positive charges appear on the opposite side. Because we know that the same charges repel each other and the opposite charges attract each other. This rod is brought close to the conducting object A. It means that it is attracting towards the object A. That's why the negative charges show on this face while the opposite charge is shown on the opposite side. So I write here opposite charges attract each other and similar charges repel. That's why equal number of negative charges appear on the left side while equal number of positive charges appear on the right side. Part 2. A wire is connected from object A to earth. State and explain any movement of charge. So here we have take a wire that is connected from this object to earth. I write here earth. Then what will happen? First of all, when the charged rod B that is brought near the conducting object A, then the negative charges of the object A will be attracted towards the positive charges of the rod B. That's why these negative charges will attract it towards this rod, and on this place there will appear positive charge. Because it lost electron, there become positive charge. And now the conducting object A is totally positive. So the charges from the ground will be shifted on the conducting object A to balance the excess positive charge. That's why I write here in the statement that the negative charges flow from earth to object. Negative charges flow from earth to object. And in explanation, I write that electron flow to balance excess positive charges on object. Electrons means that negative charges flow to balance excess positive charge on the object. Part B. There is a current in wire of 0.65 milliampere for 2.2 minutes. Calculate the charge that flow. Here current is given, I is equal to 0.65 milliampere. We have to convert this value into amperes. I write here 0.65 into 10 की power minus 3 ampere, and the time is given 2.2 minutes. And we have to convert it into seconds, so I write here 2.2 into 60 seconds. And we have to find out the charges Q. We know that I is equal to Q over T. From here we have to calculate Q. Q will be equal to I cross T. And current is given 0.65 into 10 की power minus 3. Time is given 2.2 into 60. So the total charges comes to be 0.086. The unit of charge is coulomb. So charges will be equal to 0.086 coulombs. Question number 9, part A. Figure 9.1 shows a cell of electromotive force EMF 1.5 volt and a battery of EMF 6.0 volt connected in series. So in figure 9.1 you can see that there are cell and battery which are connected in series. The EMF of cell is 1.5 while the EMF of this battery is 6.0 volt. Calculate the combined EMF of the cell and battery. We have to calculate the combined EMF of this cell and battery. So the combined EMF will be equal to the EMF of the cell plus EMF of the battery. So I write here EMF will be equal to EMF across cell plus EMF across battery. So in the question it is given that EMF across the cell is 1.5 plus the EMF across battery is 6.0 volt. So the combined EMF comes to be 7.5 volt. So I write here EMF is equal to 7.5 volt. Part B. The combined resistance of the three resistors shown in 9.2 is 4.4 ohms. So this is the combined resistance of these three resistors. Part 1. Calculate the resistance of resistor R. We have to calculate this resistance. So in this combination we can say that 2.0 ohm and 3.0 ohms. These are connected in parallel, and this parallel combination is series with R. So first of all we have to calculate the combined resistance of this parallel combination. I write here resistance of parallel combination which I represent by Rp. So Rp will be equal to, in a parallel combination when we have to find out the equivalent resistor, it will be equal to the reciprocal 1 over Rp. It will be equal to the reciprocal of each resistor in this combination. So it is 2.0 plus 1 over 3.0, and it comes to be 6.0, 3 plus 2 and 5 divided by 6, and then Rp comes to be 1.2 ohms. So Rp, the resistance of this combination, the combined resistance of 3.0 ohm and 2.0 ohm, it comes to be 1.2 ohms. No, I draw this figure again, that this is R and this R is now in series with the parallel combination Rp. And in the series combination we know that the total resistance, that is combined resistance, will be equal to this R plus Rp. So R combined is given 4.4 ohm. I write here 4.4 will be equal to R plus Rp. We calculate it is 1.2 ohm. So R comes to be 3.2 ohms. So the value of this resistance is 3.2 ohms. I write here part 2. The current I in figure 9.2 is 0.94 amperes. Calculate the potential difference PD across the combination of resistor. So we have to find out the potential difference across the whole combination, and here the combined resistance of these three resistors given to be 4.4, and also the current is given. So by using Ohm's law we can calculate it easily. I write here V is equal to IR, which is Ohm's law. From here we have to calculate the value of V. It comes to be, the current is 0.94 multiplied by the combined resistance given in the question. It is equal to 4.4 ohms. So multiply it with 4.4. So the potential difference comes to be 4.136, and it is approximately equal to 4.1 volt. So the potential difference will be 4.1 volt. Question number 10, part A. Name the logic gate shown in figure 10.1. In figure 10.1, here is a logic gate that consists of two inputs. The inputs are this and this, and the single output that is represented by this. We have to tell the name of this logic gate. So this is basically OR gate. I write here OR gate. Part B. Figure 10.2 shows a combination of logic gates. Here is a figure 10.2 and there is a single input I and a single output O. So this gate is basically NOT gate. I write here NOT, and the output of this NOT gate becomes the input of next gate, and this gate is NOR gate, which is the combination of NOT and OR gate. So I write here NOR gate, and it is the combination of NOT plus OR gate. Complete the right hand column of table 10.1, the truth table for the combination of logic gates. You may use the blank column for your working. So in table 10.1 we have complete this table. So first of all I write the truth table for NOR gate, and it will be just like this. First of all I draw the lines to show the inputs and outputs. I consider that there are two inputs A and B, and when I OR these inputs it will be A or B. But we have to draw this truth table according to NOR gate. So it will be A or B, and I take NOT of this. So first of all consider that inputs are 0 0, then 0 1, 1 0 and 1 1, and when I apply OR gate over it, it will be 0 1 1 and 1. In OR gate we can say that when any input is high, the output will be high, and when both of the inputs are low, output will be low, and then we have to take the NOT of these outputs, and in the NOT gate we convert 0 into 1 and 1 into 0, so it becomes 1 and 1 changes into 0. So this is the truth table of NOR gate. Now here inputs are 0 and 1, which are the inputs of NOT gate. So I consider that here is input 0. When I apply NOT gate over it, it becomes 1, and then here input comes to be 1 1, and when the inputs are 1 1, that is of NOR gate, then its output will be 0. So I write here the output will be equal to 0. So answer will be 0. Second one, when input is 1, then the output of NOT will be equal to 0. This will be apply here 0 0 and 0 0. The output of NOR gate will be 1. That is high value. That's why I write here 1. So the output comes to be 1. So I complete the truth table according to the given circuit. Next part, C. An electrical device has a metal case. Explain the benefit of earthing the metal case. So there are many benefits of earthing the metal case, and in case when live wire touches the metal case, then the earthing prevent electrocution. So I write here earthing prevents electrocution if live wire touches metal case. Part D. Part 1. Explain how a fuse protects a circuit. Here we have to explain the basic principle of fuel, and if the current in a circuit is too much high, then we use the fuel, and then fuse melt and there will be no short circuit. I write here, if current in circuit is very high, fuse melt. In this case, there will be no short circuit. Part 2. The current in an electric kettle connected to the main through a fuse of 10 ampere. Fuses with the following rating are available: 3 ampere, 9 ampere, 10 ampere, 13 ampere and 30 ampere. So here we can see that the kettle has current 10 ampere. So any current that is greater than this value should be blocked. And in order to block this, we use the fuse in the circuit. That's why the value that is less than 10 ampere cannot flow. So I write here, the value of current that is greater than 10 ampere should be blocked. So 3 ampere should not flow through the circuit. Similarly, 9 ampere cannot flow because it is less than 10. And 10 ampere is actually equal to 10 ampere, so it can also be not flow. And the nearest value to 10 is 13 ampere. So 13 ampere is the correct answer, because it is very close to 10 ampere. So I write here, fuse values is above but near the operating current 10 ampere. But near the operating current (10 amperes). Question number 11, Part A. Describe the composition and structure of the neutral atom of beryllium-8, which has a proton number 4 and nucleon number of 8. So we have to describe the composition of neutral atom of beryllium. So we know that for every atom there is a small nucleus that is surrounded by the electrons. So I write here, it has a very small nucleus surrounded by electrons. Secondly, we know that the protons and neutrons reside inside the nucleus. So I write here, protons and neutrons reside inside nucleus. Now we calculate the number of protons and number of nucleons and the number of neutrons. So as given that it is a neutral atom, it means that the number of protons must be equal to number of electrons. It is given in the question that the number of protons are 4. That's why the number of electron is also 4. I write here number of electrons are 4. Now we calculate the number of neutrons and it will be equal to the nuclear number, that is represented A, minus number of protons or atomic number. Here it is given that nuclear number is 8 minus the proton number is 4 and it is equal to N, that is number of neutrons. So N will be equal to 4. It means that the neutral atom of beryllium 8 has number of neutrons that is equal to 4. So I write here number of neutrons is 4. Part B. A radioactive isotope decay by beta emission. To form an isotopes of barium with nucleon number 135. There is a table 1.1. There is a table 11.1. Use data from table 11.1 to write down the nuclide equation for this decay. So we have to write the nuclide equation for this decay, and we can see from there that it decays into barium. It means that one product is barium and it decays through beta emission. It means that the second product is electron, that is beta particles. So I write here beta particle 0 and minus 1 plus the second product is barium, and barium here is given that its atomic number or proton number are 56. When we write the symbol of any element, it is written in such a way that at that place we write the number of proton that is equal to atomic number. So I write it with Z, and at that place we write the nuclear number, that is the number of protons and neutrons. So it is represented by A. When I write the barium, its atomic number or number of proton is 56. I write here 56, and it is given that the nuclear number is 135. So its nuclear number will be equal to 135. I write here 135. We don't know that on reactant side which element is present. So first of all we check the total atomic number and nuclear number on the product side. So I write here nuclear number, it is equal to 0 plus 135, which is equal to 135, and protons minus 1 plus 56, it is equal to 55. So any element that has atomic number or number of proton equal to 55 will be on the reactant side. From this table we can see that this element is cesium, whose number of protons are 55 and its symbol is Cs. So I write here cesium, whose number of protons are 55, and the nuclear number remains same because there is no change in the nuclear number when element undergoes beta emission. So I write here 135. This is the complete decay of cesium by beta decay, and it decay into barium.